And Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and virtually from beautiful Stonehenge. And today, we are doing Midday with Reverend Don, as we do every weekday, and I hope you're having a lovely day, and I'm looking forward to spending this half hour with you. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, we can communicate directly if you type your contact, your comment or your question into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and it will appear here in my chat room, and we'll talk directly. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. And winter has arrived here in Central Illinois, and I'm showing a little bit in my throat today, so please pardon me. And a little bit in my subject today. Our subject today is variety. So we're going to talk about a variety of things. And I'm hoping that those of you who are watching will also feel free to comment, because I have some things I would like to get your opinion on. And one of them is, what kind of things would you like to hear me continue to talk about in this program? I choose subjects based on what's going on in my life, what's going on in the world. Um, Are there particular subjects you would like to hear me um, talk about? Hello to Janet in the chat room. Would you like to see me do more interviews again? For a little while, I was doing interviews. I could start doing more interviews again. What kind of thing? Oh, and hello to Julia in the chat room. Julia says tarot. And interestingly enough, um, I have my tarot cards right here. So maybe let me write down tarot as a subject to do more on. Now, tonight, I will be appearing on Tarot Thursday on Pagan World TV. If you'd like to see me reading some tarot. And, but as you know, I've written a number of classes and books on the subject of tarot. I've created a number of tarot decks, notably the Tarot of Hecate and the wider Infinite Tarot that has a wide range of manifestations. So yeah, we could talk at some length about tarot. That would be a good subject. Thank you, Julia. What other things might people be interested in, and what would people suggest as a subject for my next book? My last book, The Book of the Dead, as you know, I finished a few days ago. We put in the order with the publisher last night, and they should be on their way just as soon as they are printed. And I'm hoping to have them to you by November 11th or shortly after, depending on when they get to us. But we'll get them to you as soon as possible. And Julia says, more on how to read tarot. And we can certainly do that. And of course, how to read tarot is quite a broad subject, and Janet says that she too would love to hear more about tarot. I'm also doing classes at psychicacademy.com. We're currently doing Psychic 101. Last night was class number 6, talking about divination, which of course included tarot. So we have that going as well. We are working on putting together Witch College, which will undoubtedly have a section on tarot. And of course, if you belong to Witch School, we have numerous sections on tarot there. But we can certainly talk about tarot here. And one of the things, of course, that does happen is when you're talking live, sometimes you think to mention things that you don't put in writing because maybe they don't seem relevant in writing, but they may be in conversation. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. And it's always very interesting to see the difference between a spoken conversation and a written conversation. One of the interesting things about Psychic Academy is that the classes are being done live and recorded rather than written, which makes them in a different style than what I normally do. And probably a little more rambling, because I ramble a little more when I speak, but that also takes me into sometimes more interesting directions. Um, and of course, there will be books following. Um, as I was saying, on a few occasions, I'm currently looking at doing shorter, more focused books than what I've done in the past. I just did the Book of the Dead, looking for a subject for the next one. Maybe my career as a psychic reader might be an interesting book subject. I don't know. What do people think of that idea? I'd say that I would name all the big names and tell all the big secrets, except the people I knew weren't necessarily all that big. And the secrets are mostly pretty fun. But I have known some very interesting people in the psychic fair circuits. And as I was putting together the Book of the Dead, I was looking for a photo of Eleanor Royce, who used to be known as the Rolls Royce of psychic readers. And really what was just that good. She was known, among other things, for taking part in the annual Houdini seance that used to happen, maybe it still happens at Halloween every year. And she was a spiritualist medium who had been practicing, I think, since she was like 4 years old. And she was in her 80s when I knew her. I believe she was 87 at the time of her death. Fascinating woman, could not find a thing about her online. I was very disappointed. I was looking also for my friend Rosemary Fletcher. And they say that everything is online, but not so easy to find. And I don't know that some of these things are online. Of course, they were more or less regional psychics. Um, but still, I would have thought there would be something more that I could have found about them than what I was able to find. Um, I was able to find a photo of Rosemary out of my own collection. I have a photo of Eleanor, but it's not with me here on this computer. But I do have it, but not in this book for that reason. Um, the story of Eleanor Royce. Um, she appears in the book Psychic City Chicago or Psychic Chicago by oh, what was his name? Brad Steiger. Um, in the 1970s, but I believe there she was known as Eudora, which is perhaps a pseudonym she used earlier in her career. When I knew her, she was going by her actual name, Eleanor Royce. My friend Rosemary had a very interesting story about meeting Eleanor. She had come to her very first fair to audition for a part. Because at most psychic fairs, they want the managers want you to read for them, so they know that you know what you're doing. And Rosemary had been talked into the idea that, yeah, she should start reading at psychic fairs. So she came to the fair and she's looking around at all the readers and she's looking around and there's this one over here and that one over there and Eleanor Roosevelt at this table reading cards, and then over here is another psychic, and then she stopped and said, "What? Why is Eleanor Roosevelt sitting at a table in a psychic fair doing readings? Eleanor Roosevelt has been dead for 20 years. This is a heck of a vision." And she turned back, and there was Eleanor Roosevelt sitting at the table reading cards. Um, or actually, I don't think it was necessarily cards, but she was doing readings. And she looked at it, and it looked for all the world like Eleanor Roosevelt. And right in front of her is a sign that says Eleanor. What turns out, of course, it was not Eleanor Roosevelt. It was Eleanor Royce, who happened to look remarkably like Eleanor Roosevelt later in life. Um, and that was the start of a great friendship for the two of them. And Eleanor was, having been a reader for almost a century, she was a tremendous source of learning for everyone who knew her, and a tremendous source of history, and a fascinating person. So one of many interesting little psychic stories. Um, what else might we like to hear me talk about? What else might we like to hear me discuss? I'm aware that sometimes I can just be a talking head. And I can talk about things people don't necessarily want to hear about. So I'm curious to know what you do want to hear about. Well, that was an interesting effect with my cup. Um, one of the things I sometimes talk about is how amazing it is that we can do the things that we do now with videography. Back in the 1980s, I was attempting to make an amateur movie based on the works of Donna Lyon-Rose. Hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kazan. Donna Lyon-Rose, who you probably have never heard of, but she was, in my opinion, one of the greatest poets in the pagan community, particularly back in that 20th century. And she had written a series of novels, or I suppose we should call them novellas, on Druidry in late Roman Britain. Really bardic practice because the Druids were no longer current in late Roman Britain, though they were still present in Ireland. And I was going to make a movie out of these. I was working on it. Um, and in doing that, I was working with and looking into a lot of technology. And one of the things that would have made that project so much easier is to be able to have a background like this. Um, but in order to do that at that time, I would have needed to buy a studio that cost, I believe, $25,000. Completely impossible on my budget. It was a very low budget production to start with. But today it comes with the program, and I don't even actually have to have a green screen to use this background. I am using a green screen, um, but the technology has changed and advanced so much that it's something we can take for granted now, and that's just amazing to me. Now, hello to Yazo in the chat room, and Yazo says they would like to hear more about the foundation of the Karelian tradition, so we can certainly talk about that. So let me add that onto our list. Foundations of Karelianism. And as you may know, this spring we will have the Lustration of the Ancestors. And I believe a lot of people have already planned to come to that. And many more, I think, will before we're done. And it's going to be, in its way, a bit of a historic lustration. It is a double investiture for First Priest Phoenix Coffin Williams and First Priestess Alyssa Maxon Kemp. The first time there's been a double investiture since 1979, and probably the last time there will be one. We had never thought there'd be a second one, but that's not how things worked out. Um, but it should be quite a spectacular affair. And lustrations, although the word is not unique to Karelianism, the festival is. It's a festival we observe twice yearly, once to honor the ancestors and once to honor the living. And it is a blessing of all the members of the tradition, both who are ancestors and who are living, as a single circle standing together. It is the invocation of the oracle of the ancestors. It is also, in its way, a protection ceremony. It has a number of different aspects to it. And it is something that has been part of Karelianism as far as I can remember, going back a long way, possibly to the very beginning. I don't know. Um, in its current form, it was created about 20 years ago to be a public presentation. Prior to that, they had been a private function of the Mother Temple, a little simpler than they are as a public ceremony. And we decided back then that we wanted to make it an encapsulation of Karelian teachings on the subject of the universe and incarnation. And so the ceremony is that. It is not only all the things I just said, but it is a recapitulation of some of our most important Karelian teachings in ceremonial form. And we did this. We've done this several times now at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and at one of them, we got a most interesting compliment. I think it was meant to be a compliment. Um, Someone said they had attended it and enjoyed it, but until then, they had thought that the ADF had very long, involved ceremonies, and now they knew that the ADF had nothing on Corellianism. for that subject, and that's certainly true if you've ever been to illustration, and there are many of them online that you can see. It is our most ceremonial offering. Although our initiations are fairly ceremonial, also most of our rituals don't tend to be. But these things do because they touch on important aspects of teaching, and it's part of how we pass that teaching on, as well as through the instruction in our lessons. But these are the places, because many people who attend illustration may not be clergy, they may never become clergy. And in some cases, this is where they will learn those teachings um, through the rite itself. And therefore, although some aspects are more popular than others, I think the general consensus is I'm the only one who can do the invocation of the 70 gods. Um, at least, that's not really true. Others have done it, but and Lord Phoenix does a very good job with that. But it is certainly a thing. Yazo said, I read of a lady's teaching on the website. She was fascinating. I assume that was probably my mother, Laveda. And Yazo said, I'd like to know more about her also. We can talk about her. We can talk about different ancestors. My mother wrote the Five Mystic Secrets, which is why I think she's probably the one that you're speaking of. The Five Mystic Secrets was originally intended to be something along the lines of an anti-tract. And if you've heard that term before, it's probably from the Aquarian Tabernacle, referring to the other people that I later was involved in creating along with Pete Pathfinder Davis and Oberon Zell, which Pete called an anti-tract because it was meant to be a piece of literature in opposition to the kind of Christian tracts that you'll see left around in different places. The Five Mystic Secrets was originally intended to be that kind of thing too. It's actually a little long for that. It became instead one of these seminal written teachings of the Corellian tradition, and it talks about the five secrets to a truly free and effective life. And it came out in 1986, I believe. Um, my mother wrote it. I illustrated it. It was a long time ago. She signed it using the pseudonym Elizabeth Greenwood because she was not at that time ready to be out of the closet. Because it was a whole different time. I, on the other hand, was out of the closet, but that's beside the point. And also, my mother had always wanted a name like Elizabeth because her given name was Laveda, and her middle name was Nadine. And so in school, she had nothing to hide behind except her very colorful names. And she'd always wished she had been a Betty or an Elizabeth. And so for her pseudonym, that's what she chose. And Greenwood, which was the name of the family home, and also our branch of the High Corel family, sometimes goes by the name Greenwood. There's also a Redwood branch, which is more 19th century, and are the subject of some very colorful legends. Um, both colorful legends and colorful truths. They were arguably more colorful then than we are now, and maybe a little more devil may care, if you'll pardon the expression. So yeah, we can talk about some of that. Um, let me add that also onto the list. And there are many things I have talked about. I've talked at different points about the nature of the soul and incarnation. I've talked about my ideas about leadership. I think I may. And Yazo says it is classic and valuable teaching. I bet she was wonderful, and I would love to know more about this. Well, I thought she was wonderful. I regarded her as one of my best friends. We had a very good relationship, and she had a very interesting life. And when she died, her funeral all but overflowed the room, um, which I think speaks to how she interacted with people. And I've been known to describe her as been known to describe myself as being the child of a madman and a saint. She would be the saint. Um, she was married to my father, John, who was a fascinating individual, very charismatic, very charming, um, and at times definitely insane. He was a ceremonial, I guess we could say goetic, and he was also he was also schizophrenic, which he blamed on his practice of magic. He felt that he had gone beyond the safe point earlier than he should have done, gone into areas that were beyond his capability, and that this had damaged his mentality. I don't know if that's true, but I take it seriously. And, I've seen a lot of posts online talking about the dangers of magic. There aren't very many, in my opinion, but that's one of them. Losing your place in reality. But you only really have to worry about that when you're dealing with fairly serious magic, when you're dealing with things that deal with the nature of reality. You run the risk of losing your place in it, which is easy to avoid if you've been properly instructed. But apparently he was not. The way that you avoid it, of course, is by being well grounded, having a good sense of yourself and your life. And in Kabbalah, I believe it's Lurian Kabbalah in particular, they used to say that you needed to be at least 40 years old, married with children, to be studying Kabbalah, and not become ungrounded. Because being of that age, you would have a good sense of yourself. Having family and children, you could not allow yourself to become ungrounded, which might happen otherwise. It's the same idea. I don't think you need to be 40 years old. I don't think you need to be married with children. I do think that you need to be well grounded. And Yaza says, "What a childhood that must have been." Oh, it was. I will say that it had its ups and its downs. There were periods of time where it was quite wonderful, and periods of time where it was definitely not. Um, there were a lot of restrictions in certain periods. There were a period of years where I hardly saw anyone outside of the family. Um, at least outside of things like official functions like school. Um, and spent my time almost entirely reading and being educated. Um, which on one hand has turned out to be a good thing. On the other hand, it was a very interesting and sometimes very entertaining and sometimes lonely experience, and it left me with maybe too much of a liking for solitude that has not always worked to my advantage. But I spent a lot of my childhood that way, which interestingly I have found is also something that you find in certain other religious backgrounds, where if a child is destined for a future in the clergy, they will be held back socially and educated instead. So, not really a controversial choice, I suppose, but unusual in the world I was living in. And it's because of that, both that I acquired the education I acquired and have always continued it. I learned to love reading and learning in other ways. And my parents later explained to me that they had made a choice before my birth that every occasion, every question I asked would be a learning experience, that they would use it to its highest effect, and they did. Um, I knew things probably much earlier than most people my age because they were not hesitant to explain them. And they did not, for the most part, feel They did not give in to the bugaboo of age-appropriate information, um, on most subjects. So I can remember my mother reading the Iliad to me, before I knew how to read, which I think, no other mother in our neighborhood would certainly have done. I remember her reading The Pilgrim's Progress, although she wasn't entirely thrilled with that one, but I wanted to hear it because I liked the pictures. And my father pointed out that it was still an educational experience and that I would not be damaged by the religious message because I wasn't going to take it at that level. I'd take it as an adventure story, which is what happened. Um, and Yaza says, I was that type of parent and very criticized for it. I think that the lack of this kind of attitude is one of the greatest problems in our society. I am not a great believer in the idea of age peers, for example. I see a lot of people who seem to think that you should only hang out with people your own age. I can't imagine anything more destructive. I think it's extremely good for children to be around older people, particularly their grandparents, their great uncles and aunts. I think it's very good for old people to be around young people, whether they're their grandchildren and other descendants or just young people in general. I'm very happy to be around many young people. I can't imagine anything worse than being stuck with no one except people of my own age. Um, Not that I don't enjoy the company of people my own age and older. I do, but not only. And yet I find some people who think, well, who else would you have anything in common with? Well, that's the problem. Um, are you a fly in amber who never changes or grows? I remember when I was a child, there was a huge age gap, which was a huge subject everywhere in the 60s. And one of the things you often heard was older people who hated younger people's music, younger people's fashion, younger people's artwork. They just couldn't wrap their heads around it. I always swore I'd never be that person, and I have not, to my knowledge, become that person. I love much contemporary music. I certainly do not hold myself in the music of the 70s and 80s. Um, and I try to stay at least relatively current with what is the current musical fashion and to understand how it changes and why it changes, the current artistic fashion. And although my clothing choices do not change with fashion for the most part, it's not because I necessarily dislike current fashions. It's because I have my own style that I've always followed and plan to continue following. Um, I think it's very important when we have children that we expose them to as much knowledge and information as we can, and not just the Teletubbies, not just Paw Patrol. And yes, of course, they're going to enjoy things that are aimed for their age. But they're only going to be that age for a short time. And it's important for them to understand other things. It's important for them to understand the world that they're living in. And I see a lot of people don't seem to want their children to know. Particularly people who come from certain political backgrounds don't want their children to know that the world is not exactly like their home. For those of us who come from minority religions, we have to understand that very early because we'll find it out whether we want to or not. For those who come from some of the more dominant religions, they think they can hide from it, and maybe they can, but they shouldn't. It's not healthy. Um, and Yasso says, "I agree. How can children survive in a world they have no clue about?" And I think we see that a lot. Maybe less than formerly, but it used to be that a lot of young people were very disillusioned when they came to adulthood. And one of the reasons they were disillusioned was they had been given a fantasy image of the world. When they found out what it really was, they felt they'd been lied to. I think we need to be very clear with young people about the problems in the world. And that, yes, good people are trying to fix them, but they are there. To try to act like they're not there is going to create very disillusioned young people. Or conversely, young people who just don't have a clue what's going on. Um, and I think that particularly when those subjects are uncomfortable, certain historical subjects, for example, it's all the more important that we look at them and then look at our present and look at our future and how are we going to make it better. Because if you don't acknowledge there was a problem, you can't ever fix it. You're just going to keep fighting the same fights. So these are some of my thoughts on that. I suppose maybe we'll talk more about that in the future. I want to thank you all for joining me. I want to thank you for your suggestions. And I hope that you're having a lovely new liturgical year so far. I will be back tomorrow and we'll continue our conversation. Um, and Yazo says, for some reason, they try to make everyone into June and Ward Cleaver. Just not realistic. And they weren't realistic even at that time. Most women did not sit at home wearing pearls and high heels while they did the vacuuming. Um, but that's how they wanted to be seen on television. And it's an interesting comment on the time. Um, and in fact, I find that you rarely see realistic images portrayed on television. And I get that they're aspirational, and that's good, but it's not good to ignore reality either. So I think we need to have a balance of what we aspire to be and who we are. So thank you, everyone. We've come to the end of our half hour. Let us close with our prayer, as we always do, and then I will see you tomorrow. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be clear-minded as we go through our lives, to keep our eye on both who we are and who we wish to be, to see our problems clearly so that we may solve them, and see our aspirations clearly so that we may reach them. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and with respect. We know you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow on Midday with Reverend Don.